Alex Oden, a young black man in Harlem, had dreams of college and helping kids. But in 2014, a racist cop, Daniel Hargrove, framed him for a crime he didn't commit, stealing 11 years in prison. Now, free, Alex faces Hargrove at the same bus stop, his fists ready, his heart burning. One punch could cost him everything, or win him justice. Watch to see if Alex reclaims his life in this raw, gripping tale of rage and redemption. As you watch, kindly subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell to get notified when we share our next encouraging story. Alex Oden had been struggling to survive in the city of New York, running different shift jobs just to get by. Every day. He was a peaceful and honest black man, but on one very unfortunate day, an incident in his apartment, which he was completely clueless about, got him sent to prison because the officer involved in handling the case was a racist and quickly branded him a suspect. From being a suspect, Alex found out he was being sent to prison and was to spend the rest of his life there for a crime he was completely innocent of. The air in Harlem clung to Alex's skin like a second shirt, thick with summer heat and the faint tang of street vendors' sizzling grills. His sneakers scuffed against the cracked sidewalk on 125th Street, the rhythm of his steps syncing with the pulse of the city, honking taxis, the low hum of jazz spilling from a bar, and the chatter of kids weaving through the crowd. At 27, Alex was a lean figure with eyes that held both weariness and a quiet spark, like he was always searching for something better just beyond the horizon. His days were a blur of survival, early mornings at the bodega stocking shelves, afternoons hauling crates at a warehouse, and nights wiping down tables at a diner that smelled of grease and broken dreams. But he carried himself with a dignity that didn't bend, even when the world pressed hard against him. That morning, Alex woke in his one-room apartment in a crumbling brownstone, the kind where the pipes groaned like they were auditioning for a horror flick. Sunlight sliced through the single window, catching dust motes that danced like tiny ghosts. He stretched, his muscles aching from a double shift, and checked his phone, 6:03 a.m. Another day to grind. He pulled on a faded t-shirt, brewed coffee in a pot that had seen better days, and whispered a prayer his mama taught him, asterisk. Keep me steady, Lord. Keep me whole. Asterisk. It was a ritual, a tether to the memory of his mother, who'd passed when he was 16, leaving him to navigate the world with nothing but her wisdom and his own stubborn heart. Alex's life wasn't glamorous, but it was his. He'd grown up in this neighborhood, knew every corner store clerk by name, every graffiti tag story. He was the guy who'd help an old lady with her groceries, or toss a basketball with the kids outside the rec center, even when his bones screamed for rest. But beneath it all was a weight, a sense that the city, for all its noise and color, could turn on him in a heartbeat. That day, July 12, 2014, started like any other. He was due at the bodega by 7 a.m., so he grabbed his backpack, locked the door, and jogged down the stairs, the wood creaking under his weight. Outside, the street was alive, vendors setting up carts, a bus wheezing to a stop. He nodded to Mrs. Carter, who sold flowers from a stand, her hands gnarled but quick as she arranged roses. "Looking sharp, Alex," she called, and he flashed her a grin, tossing back, "Only 'cause you keep the block pretty, Mrs. C." He didn't notice the police cruiser idling across the street, its engine a low growl. He didn't see the officer inside, a man with a jaw like a brick and eyes that scanned the crowd with cold precision. Officer Daniel Hargrove had been on the force for 15 years, a veteran who wore his badge like a crown and saw Harlem as his personal chessboard. To him, young black men like Alex were pawns, expendable, suspect by default. Hargrove had a reputation in the precinct for keeping order, which often meant arrests based on little more than a hunch and a sneer. His notebook was filled with names, but Alex's Wasn't one of them, yet. Alex was halfway to the bodega when he heard the shout. Yo, stop right there! The voice was sharp, slicing through the morning din. He turned confused, his hands instinctively rising to show they were empty. Hargrove was out of the cruiser now, striding toward him, one hand on his holster, the other clutching a radio that crackled with static. You in the gray shirt. Don't move. Me? Alex's voice was steady, but his heart kicked up a notch. He stood still, palms up, the way he'd learned growing up. Don't give them a reason. Officer, what's this about? Hargrove's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. You live at 238 West 126th, right? Apartment 3B? Alex nodded, his stomach tightening. Yeah, that's me. What's going on? We got a call. Break-in at your building. Neighbor says they saw someone matching your description. Leaving the scene. Hargrove's tone was flat, rehearsed, like he was reading from a script he'd used 100 times. A break-in? Alex's brows furrowed. I just left my place. I didn't see anything. I've been home all night. Save it, Hargrove snapped, stepping closer. His hand twitched near his gun, a silent threat. Turn around, hands on the wall. Alex's mind raced. He knew the drill: comply, stay calm, survive the moment. But something in Hargrove's eyes, a glint of malice, told him this wasn't just a routine stop. He turned slowly, placing his hands on the rough brick of the bodega's wall, the morning crowd parting around them like water around a stone. Whispers rippled through the onlookers, phones already out, recording. I didn't do anything, Alex said, his voice low but firm. You got the wrong guy. Hargrove patted him down, rougher than necessary, his hands lingering like he was searching for an excuse. We'll see about that. Got ID? In my wallet. Back pocket. Alex kept his eyes forward, focusing on the brick, on the faint graffiti tags. Layered like history. He could feel the officer's breath on his neck, the weight of eyes from the crowd. Mrs. Carter was watching, her face tight with worry. Hargrove pulled out the wallet, flipping through it with a grunt. Alexander Oten. Figures. He tossed the wallet onto the sidewalk, letting it skid into the gutter. You're coming with me. For what? Alex turned his head slightly, just enough to meet Hargrove's gaze. It was a mistake. The officer's hand shot out, grabbing Alex's arm and twisting it behind his back. Pain flared, but Alex bit down on a groan, refusing to give Hargrove the satisfaction. Resisting, Hargrove said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. That's what. I'm not resisting. Alex's voice rose, but he kept his body still, even as the cuffs snapped around his wrists, cold and tight. The crowd murmured, some shouting. He didn't do nothing. But Hargrove was already marching him toward the cruiser, his grip like a vice. At the precinct, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of coffee and old paper. Alex sat in a holding cell, his hands still cuffed, his mind replaying the morning. A break-in? He hadn't heard a thing, no screams, no crashes, no sirens until Hargrove showed up. He'd been in his apartment, asleep, then up for coffee and work. The math didn't add up. Hours passed before Hargrove appeared, leaning against the cell door with a smirk. You're in deep. Oten. Burglary, assault, stolen goods found in your apartment. Neighbor ID'd you. Stolen goods? What are you talking about? Alex stood, his voice sharp but controlled. I didn't take anything. I wasn't even there. Tell it to the judge. Hargrove's eyes gleamed, like he was enjoying this. Found a TV, some jewelry. Right under your bed. Convenient, huh? Alex's breath caught. He lived alone, his apartment barely furnished, a mattress, a chair, a lamp. There was no TV, no jewelry. You're lying. he said, his voice low, trembling with a mix of fear and rage. You planted that stuff. Hargrove laughed, a short, ugly sound. Good luck proving that, kid. He turned to leave, then paused, glancing back. You people always think you can talk your way out. You people. The words hit like a slap, but Alex didn't flinch. He held Hargrove's gaze, his jaw tight, his dignity a shield. I'm not your kid, he said quietly. And I'm not what you think I am. The officer's smirk faded, just for a second, before he walked away, leaving Alex with the echo of his boots on the concrete floor. The days blurred into weeks. Alex was charged with burglary and assault, based on Hargrove's report. And a witness, who claimed to have seen him fleeing the scene. The witness, a nervous older man from his building, barely made eye contact in court, his testimony vague but damning. Alex's public defender, a harried woman with too many cases, did her best, but the evidence, planted, Alex was sure, piled up. A flat-screen TV, a diamond ring, a gold watch, all found in his apartment during a search he wasn't present for. The prosecution painted him as a career criminal, a predator preying on his own community. Never mind that Alex had no record, no history of trouble. Never mind that he'd been working 2 jobs to save for a better life, maybe a degree in social work to help kids like he'd been. In the courtroom, Alex sat ramrod straight, his suit borrowed from a church charity, his eyes scanning the faces, jurors, Judge Hargrove. The officer sat in the back, arms crossed, his face a mask of smug certainty. Alex's lawyer argued his innocence, pointed out inconsistencies, but the system was a machine, grinding slow and relentless. The neighbor's testimony, the evidence, Hargrove's authoritative voice, it all stacked against him. Alex took the stand, his voice steady despite the knot in his chest. I didn't do this, he said, looking at the jury, at the judge, at anyone who might listen. I've never stolen anything in my life. I work hard. I tried to do right by people. That officer. He glanced at Hargrove, whose eyes narrowed. He decided I was guilty before he even knew my name. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Alex sat in the holding area, his hands clasped, whispering his mama's prayer. He thought of her smile, her hands braiding his hair when he was small, her voice telling him to hold his head high. He thought of the kids at the rec center, the way they looked up to him. He thought of Mrs. Carter's flowers, blooming despite the concrete. He refused to let this break him. When the verdict came, the courtroom felt like it was underwater, sounds muffled, air heavy. Guilty, the foreman said, and the word landed like a brick on Alex's chest. The judge's gavel fell, a sound like a door slamming shut. Life in prison, no parole. The words didn't make sense, couldn't be real. He was 27, with dreams of a future, and now it was gone, stolen by a man with a badge and a grudge. As the judge read the sentencing, Alex's eyes locked on Hargrove. The officer stood, adjusting his belt, his face unreadable, but his eyes gleaming with something like triumph. Alex's life flashed before him, his mama's funeral, his first job sweeping floors, the nights he stayed up studying for a GED, the mornings he ran through Harlem, feeling free. It was all slipping away, like sand through his fingers. His heart pounded, his breath shallow, but he refused to look away from Hargrove. He wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing him break. The bailiff approached, cuffs ready, but Alex's gaze held steady, a silent vow burning in his chest. This wasn't the end. Not yet. Have you ever been in a situation like that, or do you know someone who have? Leave a sad emoji in the comments section if you do. Asterisk. The gavel's echo faded, but the weight of the word guilty pressed down on Alex Oten like a collapsing building. At 27, he stood in the courtroom, his borrowed suit stiff against his skin, his hands cuffed so tightly the metal bit into his wrists. The air in the New York City courthouse was stale, thick, with the scent of polished wood and despair. His eyes, wide and searching, locked onto Officer Daniel Hargrove, who stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, a faint smirk curling his lips. Alex's life, his mornings running through Harlem, his dreams of a social work degree, his mother's voice whispering, "Keep me steady, Lord!" Flashed before him in a dizzying blur. Life in prison, no parole. The sentence was a death knell, not just for his freedom but for the man he fought to become. He felt it then, a hollow certainty, this was the end. No one was coming to save him. The bailiff's grip on his arm was firm, pulling him toward the side door. Alex's legs moved mechanically, each step heavier than the last, as if the floor itself were trying to swallow him. He glanced back one last time, not at the judge or the jury, but at Hargrove. The officer's eyes gleamed with something cruel, a silent I won. Alex's chest tightened, his breath shallow, but he held his head high, his mama's pride stitched into his spine. He wouldn't let this man see him break. Not now, not ever. The first night in Rikers Island was a cacophony of metal doors clanging, shouts echoing down concrete corridors, and the low hum of despair that seemed to seep from the walls. Alex sat on the edge of a thin mattress, the cell's fluorescent light casting harsh shadows across his face. His hands, free of cuffs now, trembled slightly as he pressed them against his thighs. The reality was sinking in, cold and unyielding. He was a number now, #472819, stripped of his name, his story, his dignity. The other inmates' voices carried through the bars, some taunting, some resigned, but Alex stayed silent, his mind replaying the trial, the lies, Hargrove's smirk. He thought of Mrs. Carter's flower stand, the kids at the rec center, the bodega's flickering neon sign. Gone. All of it gone. He whispered his mother's prayer, but the words felt hollow, like they couldn't reach past the bars. For the first time since her death, Alex felt truly alone. No family, no friends close enough to fight for him. No lawyer with the time or resources to dig deeper. The system had chewed him up and spit him out, and Hargrove had been the one to feed him into its jaws. The injustice burned, a slow fire in his chest. But there was nowhere for it to go. Not yet. Days turned to weeks, then months. Rikers was a world of its own, a place where time warped, stretching and contracting in cruel ways. Alex learned to navigate it with the same quiet dignity he'd carried on the streets. He kept his head down, avoided trouble, but never let his eyes show fear. He worked in the laundry, folding sheets until his hands ached, the monotony a strange comfort. At night, he wrote in a small notebook he'd bartered for letters to his mama, thoughts about freedom, dreams he refused to let die. "I'm still here," he wrote one night, his pencil scratching against the paper. "I'm still me." But the prison wore on him. The fights in the yard, the guards' indifference, the stories of men who'd been inside for decades, their hope eroded to dust. Alex saw himself in them, and it terrified him. He'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining Hargrove out there, living free, maybe framing someone else. The thought was a splinter in his mind, sharp and persistent. He didn't want to hate, hate was a trap. His mama had always said. But it grew anyway, a dark seed taking root. Years passed, each one a slow grind. Alex turned 30, then 35, his face hardening, his body leaner but stronger from hours in the yard. He found small anchors to keep him sane, a book club run by an older inmate named Marcus, who'd once been a teacher, a weekly chess game with a guy called T, who'd laugh and say, "You play like you got a plan, Alex," and the letters he kept writing, even if they'd never be sent. He taught himself to draw, sketching Harlem's streets from memory, the lines of Mrs. Carter's roses sharp and vivid. These were his acts of defiance, proof he was more than a number. But the weight of a life sentence never lifted. Every appeal his overworked lawyer filed was denied, the evidence too tidy, Hargrove's testimony too polished. Alex's hope flickered, a candle in a storm. He'd lie in his bunk, listening to the prison's nighttime symphony, coughs, snores, the occasional sob, and wonder if this was all there was. The trauma of it, the sheer unfairness, clawed at him. He'd wake from nightmares of Hargrove's face, that smirk, those words, asterisk. You people. Asterisk. He'd clench his fists, breathe deep, and force himself to remember who he was. A man, not a monster. A son, not a statistic. 11 years in, something shifted. It was a gray morning in March 2025, the sky outside the bar. Windows heavy with the promise of rain. Alex was in the library, rereading a worn copy of Asterisk, the autobiography of Malcolm X Asterisk, when a guard called his name. Oten, you got a visitor. A visitor? Alex hadn't had one in years. Most of his old connections had faded. People moved on, lives got busy, and prison was a hard place to visit. He followed the guard, his heart thudding, to a small meeting room where a woman sat at a table, her face kind but sharp, like she'd seen the world's ugliness and refused to flinch. She introduced herself as Lena Carter, no relation to Mrs. Carter though. The name made Alex's chest ache, with the Freedom Now Project, an NGO dedicated to overturning wrongful convictions. Mr. Oten, Lena said, her voice steady but warm. We've been reviewing your case. There are inconsistencies. Significant ones. We believe you were wrongfully convicted, and we want to help. Alex stared at her, his throat tight. He'd heard promises before, lawyers, activists, even well-meaning inmates, but they'd always fizzled out. Why now? He asked, his voice rough. It's been 11 years. Lena leaned forward, her eyes meeting his. Because someone tipped us off. A retired detective from your precinct came forward. Said he'd always had doubts about your case, about Officer Hargrove's methods. He gave us enough to start digging. Hargrove. The name was a blade, cutting through the fog of years. Alex's hands clenched under the table, but he kept his face calm. What kind of digging? We're looking at everything, Lena said. The evidence, the witness, Hargrove's history. He's been flagged before, patterns of misconduct, especially with Black and Latino suspects. We're also examining the physical evidence. The TV, the jewelry. There's no chain of custody linking them to you. Beyond Hargrove's word. Alex's heart pounded, a flicker of hope he was afraid to touch. You think you can prove it? We're going to try, Lena said. But it won't be easy. Hargrove's still on the force, still got friends. We need your help, your story, your memory of that day. Every detail. For the next hour, Alex recounted it all. The morning on 125th Street, Hargrove's stop, the planted evidence, the trial. His voice shook at times, not from fear but from the weight of reliving it. Lena listened, taking notes, her face a mix of compassion and determination. When he finished, she reached across the table, her hand resting near his, not touching but close enough to feel like a lifeline. You've been through hell, Alex, she said. But you're not alone anymore. The Freedom Now project moved fast. Lena and her team dug into Hargrove's record, uncovering a trail of complaints, excessive force, questionable arrests, witnesses pressured to lie. The retired detective, a man named Rees, testified that Hargrove had bragged about cleaning up Harlem by any means necessary. The neighbor who'd ID'd Alex recanted, admitting he'd been coerced by Hargrove, threatened with eviction if he didn't comply. The physical evidence unraveled too, no fingerprints, no DNA, just Hargrove's word that the items were found in Alex's apartment. Alex followed the process from inside, meeting with Lena weekly, signing affidavits, reliving the worst days of his life. Each step was a battle, hope warring with dread, the fear that it could all fall apart again. But Lena's team was relentless, filing motions, rallying community support, even getting a local reporter to cover the case. The headline in the Amsterdam News read, "Harlem Man's 11-year fight for justice." Alex read it in the library, his hands shaking, a lump in his throat. For the first time, he felt seen. The hearing came in November 2025. Alex was transported to the courthouse, the same one where his life had been stolen. He wore a suit again, this time one Lena had brought, tailored to fit his broader shoulders. The courtroom was packed, reporters, activists, even Mrs. Carter, her hair grayer but her eyes as fierce as ever. Hargrove was there too, in uniform, his face a mask of defiance. Alex avoided his gaze, focusing on Lena, who stood at the defense table, her presence a steady anchor. The judge, a new one, listened as Lena presented the evidence, Rees's testimony, the recanted witness statement, the lack of forensic proof. She called Hargrove to the stand, where he stumbled, his answers clipped, his story fraying under her questions. "Officer Hargrove," Lena said, her voice like steel, "can you explain why the evidence log from Mr. Odin's case is missing key documentation?" Hargrove's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to Alex. "Must have been a clerical error," he muttered. 11 years, Lena said, turning to the judge. "That's how long an innocent man has paid for your clerical error." The courtroom buzzed. Alex's heart raced, his hands gripping the table. When the judge vacated his conviction, the words hit like a wave. "Mr. Odin, you are free to go." The room erupted, cheers, sobs. Mrs. Carter's voice shouting, "Thank you, Jesus!" Alex sat frozen, his breath caught, as Lena turned to him. He stood, legs unsteady, and hugged her, his first human touch in years that wasn't a pat-down or a shove. The crowd parted as he walked out, Mrs. Carter pulling him into a fierce embrace, her flowers pinned to her coat. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered. He smiled, his eyes wet, and stepped into the November air, free but forever changed. That night, Alex stood on 125th Street, the city's pulse familiar yet foreign. He was 38 now, his hair flecked with gray, his eyes carrying the weight of 11 years. Harlem had changed, new shops, new faces, but the rhythm was the same. He breathed deep, the air cold and sharp, and felt the world open up, vast and terrifying. He had no job, no home, just a small stipend from the NGO and a room at a halfway house. But he was free. Free to rebuild, to dream again. Yet one thought lingered, sharp as a blade. Hargrove. The man who'd stolen 11 years, who'd looked at Alex and seen nothing but a target. The officer was still out there, still wearing a badge, still breaking lives. Alex's hands clenched, the fire in his chest flaring. He didn't want revenge, not the kind that would land him back in cuffs. But he needed something, a moment, a reckoning. Even if it was just 1 minute, one look into Hargrove's eyes to say, "I'm still here. You didn't win, He walked toward the bus stop where it all began, his steps deliberate, his heart pounding. The streetlights cast long shadows, and in the distance, he saw a familiar figure, a man in a police uniform. Standing by a cruiser, his back to Alex. Hargrove. Alex's breath caught, his fists tightening. This was it. 1 minute. 1 act. But what would it be? If you were Alex, what would you do in this situation? Share your honest thoughts in the comments section because someone might find it helpful. The Harlem night pulsed with life, a chaotic symphony of car horns, laughter, and the faint bassline of music spilling from a nearby bar. Under the flickering glow of a streetlight on 125th Street, Alex Oaten stood frozen, his breath clouding in the November chill of 2025. At 38, he was a man reshaped by time and trauma, his lean frame hardened by 11 years in Rikers Island, his dark eyes carrying the weight of a stolen life. His hair, once a tight crop of curls, was now flecked with gray, his hands calloused from prison labor, but his posture held the unyielding dignity that had kept him whole. He was free now. Released just days ago after the Freedom Now Project, an NGO, had uncovered the truth, Officer Daniel Hargrove, a racist cop, had framed him for a burglary he didn't commit, stealing 11 years of his life. For no reason other than the color of his skin. But freedom was a fragile thing, a word that promised more than it delivered. Alex's heart pounded as he stood at the edge of the bus stop where it all began, his eyes locked on a figure in a police uniform. Hargrove. The man who looked at a 27-year-old black man working 2 jobs, dreaming of a better life, and saw only a target. The officer stood by his cruiser, his back to Alex, barking orders into a radio with the same commanding tone that had haunted Alex's nightmares. The years had touched Hargrove too. His hair was thinner, streaked with silver, his shoulders slightly stooped, his uniform hanging looser on a frame softened by age. His face, when he turned briefly, showed lines etched by time, a heaviness under his eyes. But it was nothing compared to the toll Alex had paid. 11 years in a concrete cage had carved deep lines into Alex's face, stolen the easy smile he'd once shared with kids at the rec center, and left a quiet rage smoldering in his chest. He'd lost his mother's voice in his head some nights, the prayer, asterisk, "Keep me steady, Lord. Keep me whole," asterisk, fading under the weight of despair. He'd lost the rhythm of Harlem's streets, the smell of Mrs. Carter's roses, the dreams of a social work degree to help kids like he'd been. Prison had been a slow erosion, a daily battle to hold onto his humanity. He'd seen men break, their spirits ground to dust by the relentless grind of Rikers, fights in the yard, guards who looked through you, the endless clanging of metal doors. He'd felt it himself, the creeping fear that he was losing his mind, that he'd be forgotten, a name scratched out of the world. If not for the Freedom Now Project, he would have been. Lena Carter, the lawyer with eyes that saw him as a person, not a number, had been his lifeline. She'd dug into Hargrove's history, complaints of excessive force, questionable arrests, witnesses coerced into lies. A retired detective named Rees had tipped her off, admitting he'd always doubted Hargrove's story. The neighbor who'd ID'd Alex recanted, confessing he'd been threatened with eviction. The evidence, the TV, the jewelry, found in Alex's apartment, fell apart under scrutiny. No fingerprints, no DNA, just Hargrove's word. The asterisk Amsterdam News asterisk had run the story. Harlem man's 11-year fight for justice. And the community had rallied Mrs. Carter with her flowers, the kids from the rec center, now grown, chanting his name outside the courthouse. The day his conviction was vacated, November 12, 2025, Alex had stood in the same courtroom where his life was stolen, wearing a suit Lena had brought, tailored to his broader shoulders. The judge's words, "You are free to go," had hit like a wave, and he'd hugged Lena, his first human touch in years. That wasn't a pat-down or a shove. Mrs. Carter had been there, her hair grayer, her embrace fierce, whispering, "I knew you'd come back." He'd stepped into the Harlem air, free but forever changed, the weight of 11 years clinging to him like damp cloth. Now, standing at the bus stop, Alex felt that weight again. His hands were buried in the pockets of his second-hand coat, the fabric rough against his skin, a reminder of how little he had. The halfway house was a temporary roof, the NGO's stipend barely enough for food and bus fare. Harlem had shifted, gentrified corners, coffee shops where bodegas once stood, new faces who didn't know his name. But the streets still sang to him, their rhythm pulling him back to this spot, this moment, where Hargrove had first locked eyes on him and decided his fate. Alex's sneakers scuffed the pavement as he took a step closer, his heart a steady thud. Hargrove was still by the cruiser, his radio now silent, his head tilted as he scanned the crowd. Alex studied him, noting the changes time had wrought. The officer's jowls were heavier, his eyes shadowed by fatigue, but the arrogance was unchanged, the set of his jaw, the way he stood like he owned the street. Alex's fingers twitched, the memory of those cuffs biting into his wrists as vivid as if it were yesterday. He could still hear Hargrove's voice, asterisk. Turn around, hands on the wall. Asterisk, he could still feel the lie, the planted TV and jewelry, the neighbor's nervous testimony, the trial that felt like a script written before he'd even stepped into the courtroom. He thought of the years stolen, birthdays spent in a cell, staring at a ceiling that seemed to press closer each night. Dreams of college, of helping kids buried under the weight of a life sentence. The nightmares of Hargrove's smirk, those words, asterisk, you people, asterisk, echoing like a curse. In Rikers, Alex had fought to hold on. He'd found anchors in small things, the prison library, where he read asterisk the autobiography of Malcolm X asterisk until the pages frayed, chess games with T, who'd laugh. You play like you got a plan, man. Sketches of Harlem streets, each line a memory of home. He'd written letters to his mama, long gone, pouring out his fears in a notebook hidden under his mattress. I'm still here. He'd written, over and over, a mantra to keep his sanity. But the despair had been relentless. Some nights, he'd lie awake, listening to the prison's sounds, coughs, snores, the occasional sob, wondering if this was all there was. He'd felt his mind slipping, the edges fraying, the fear that he'd become one of the men who stared blankly in the yard. Their hope eroded to nothing. He'd wake from dreams of Hargrove, that sneered, those eyes that saw him as less than human. The hate had grown, a dark vine twisting around his heart, threatening to choke out the man his mother had raised, a man who helped old ladies with groceries, who tossed a basketball with kids, who believed in doing right even when the world didn't. The Freedom Now project had been his salvation. Lena's team had moved fast, filing motions, rallying support, getting the case reopened. The hearing had been a battle, Hargrove on the stand, his answers clipped, his story unraveling under Lena's questions. Can you explain the missing evidence logs, officer? She'd asked, her voice like steel. Hargrove's muttered clerical error hadn't held up, not against Reese's testimony, the recanted witness, the lack of forensic proof. The judge's ruling had been a lifeline, but it couldn't erase the scars. Alex had walked out of the courthouse, free but not whole, the weight of those years still pressing on his chest. Now, standing 10 feet from Hargrove, Alex felt that weight shift into something else, a need, sharp and urgent, to face the man who'd taken everything. He didn't want revenge, not the kind that would land him back in cuffs. He wanted answers, a moment to stand as a man, not a victim. To make Hargrove see him, really see him, for the first time. Hey! Alex called, his voice low but clear, cutting through the crowd's murmur. Hargrove turned, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Alex. For a moment, there was no recognition, just the automatic suspicion of a cop sizing up a stranger. Alex stepped closer, his hands out of his pockets now, open at his sides to show he meant no threat. The bus stop was crowded, people jostling for space, their breath fogging in the cold. Alex's heart raced, his palms sweaty, but he kept his voice steady. You remember me? Hargrove's brow furrowed, his hand drifting toward his holster out of habit. Who are you? He said, his tone sharp, impatient, the same tone he'd used 11 years ago. Alex Oten, Alex said, each syllable deliberate, his eyes locked on Hargrove's. 11 years ago, you arrested me right here. Said I broke into an apartment, stole stuff. You lied. I went to prison for it. 11 years, man? Why? The air between them thickened, the crowd's noise fading to a distant hum. Hargrove's face changed, a flicker of recognition crossing his features, followed by something colder, irritation, disdain, the same hate Alex had seen all those years ago. There was no remorse, no trace of guilt, just a tightening of his jaw, a glint in his eyes that said he'd do it again if given the chance. Alex's chest tightened, his breath shallow, but he held his ground, his dignity a shield. He saw it all in Hargrove's eyes, the racism, the contempt, the belief that Alex was nothing, had always been nothing. You got something to say it, Hargrove snapped, stepping closer, his voice low and menacing. Or move along. Alex's heart pounded, the years of pain and loss surging up, a tidal wave he couldn't hold back. Why'd you do it? He asked, his voice raw, trembling with the weight of 11 years. Why me? I was just living my life, working, trying to make something of myself. I didn't do anything. Why'd you take it from me? Hargrove's lips curled, a sneer that cut deeper than any words. You think you're special? He said, his voice dripping with contempt. You were in the wrong place, wrong time. That's how it works. You people always. The words were a spark to gasoline. Alex's vision narrowed, the world shrinking to Hargrove's face, that sneer, those eyes that saw him as less than human. The rage he'd buried for years through every night. In Rikers, every denied appeal, every moment he'd fought to stay sane, surged up, hot and unstoppable. He didn't think, didn't plan. Just acted, his arms swinging in a blur, his fist connecting with Hargrove's jaw in a heavy, bone-jarring punch. The officer staggered, his head snapping back, his body crumpling to the pavement with a dull thud, the radio clattering from his hand. The crowd gasped, phones flashing as they recorded, voices rising in a chaotic mix of shock and excitement. Alex stood over Hargrove, his chest heaving, his knuckles throbbing, the fire in his chest still burning but now tinged with something else, fear, regret, or maybe just the weight of what he'd done. Hargrove groaned, his hand twitching toward his radio, his eyes glassy but still burning with that same hate, that same refusal to see Alex as a man. Wait. Did you see that part coming? What do you think Officer Hargrove would do at this point? A game of shadows, Alex Oden's odyssey through injustice, continued, ***. The Harlem night shattered into chaos the moment Alex Oden's fist connected with Officer Daniel Hargrove's jaw. The dull thud of the punch echoed in Alex's ears, louder than the gasps of the crowd at the 125th Street bus stop. Hargrove's body hit the pavement, his radio skittering across the asphalt, and for a fleeting second, Alex stood frozen, his chest heaving, his knuckles throbbing with a pain that felt both foreign and alive. At 38, Alex was a man forged by 11 years of wrongful imprisonment. In Rikers Island, his face lined with the scars of survival, his eyes carrying a quiet rage tempered by the dignity he'd clung to through it all. The streetlights cast long shadows, painting his silhouette against the concrete, a figure caught between justice and retribution. The crowd's murmurs swelled, phones flashing, voices shouting, some cheering, others cursing. He dropped him! A teenager yelled, his phone held high. An older woman clutched her purse, muttering, Lord help him! Alex's breath came in sharp bursts, the reality of what he'd done crashing over him like a wave. Hargrove groaned, his hand twitching toward his radio, his eyes glassy but still burning with that same hate, that same refusal to see Alex as anything more than a threat. The officer sneered those words. You people always. still hung in the air, a poison that had ignited Alex's rage. Before he could process the moment, the screech of tires cut through the noise. Another police cruiser pulled up, lights flashing, doors slamming as two officers leapt out, their hands on their holsters. Hands up! Now! One shouted, a young cop with a tense jaw, his eyes darting between Alex and Hargrove's crumpled form. Alex raised his hands slowly, his heart pounding, the memory of cuffs biting into his wrists 11 years ago flooding back. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just stood there, his gaze steady, his dignity a shield against the chaos. Get on the ground! The second officer barked, older, with a graying mustache and a voice rough from years on the job. Alex complied, lowering himself to his knees, then his stomach, the cold pavement pressing against his cheek. The crowd shouts grew louder, some protesting, some recording, a few calling for calm. He didn't do nothing wrong! A voice rang out, sharp and familiar. Alex's eyes flicked toward the sound. Mrs. Carter, her gray hair tucked under a scarf, her face fierce with the same fire she'd shown at his release. But the officers didn't listen, their focus on securing the scene. The cuffs snapped around Alex's wrists, tighter than necessary, the metal cold and familiar. As they hauled him to his feet, he caught a glimpse of Hargrove being helped up by a bystander, his jaw already swelling, blood trickling from his lip. The officer's eyes met Alex's, and even through the daze there was no remorse, only that same cold contempt. Alex's stomach churned, not with regret but with the weight of what this moment could mean, freedom, so newly won, now hanging by a thread. At the precinct, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant, the fluorescent lights harsh against the gray walls. Alex sat in a holding cell, his hands still cuffed, his coat confiscated, leaving him in a worn sweater and jeans. The cell was small, the bench hard, but it wasn't Riker's, not yet. He leaned back, closing his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. His knuckles ached, the skin split, but the pain was a distant thing compared to the storm in his mind. He'd acted on impulse, a single punch born of 11 years of injustice, but now what? Another arrest, another charge, assaulting an officer, no less. The system that had chewed him up once was ready to do it again. He thought of Lena Carter, the lawyer from the Freedom Now project who'd fought for his release. She'd warned him to stay out of trouble, to rebuild quietly, to let the world see the man he was, not the criminal Hargrove had painted him as. You're free, Alex, she'd said, her hand resting near his in that prison meeting room. But the world's still watching. He hadn't meant to throw that away. He'd only wanted Hargrove to see him, to answer for what he'd done. But that punch, God, that punch, had felt like reclaiming a piece of himself, even if it cost him everything. Hours passed, the precincts hum a constant backdrop, phones ringing, officers laughing, the clatter of keyboards. Alex's mind drifted to those 11 years in Rikers, a blur of survival and loss. He'd been 27, working 2 jobs, saving for a social work degree, dreaming of helping kids like he'd been, orphaned, scrappy, full of hope despite the odds. July 12, 2014, had changed everything. Hargrove's voice cutting through the Harlem morning. Yo, stop right there! The false accusation of burglary, the planted evidence, the coerced witness. The trial had been a farce, Hargrove's testimony polished, the jury's eyes distant. Guilty, the foreman had said, and Alex's world had collapsed, his mother's prayer, asterisk. Keep me steady, Lord. Keep me whole, asterisk, his only anchor. Rikers had been a crucible. The first night, he'd sat on a thin mattress, the cell's fluorescent light buzzing, the sounds of shouts and clanging doors seeping into his bones. He'd felt his mind fraying, the fear that he'd be forgotten, that he'd lose himself to the gray walls. He'd seen men break, eyes empty, spirits crushed, and feared he'd join them. But he'd fought to hold on. He'd found solace in the library, reading the autobiography of Malcolm X until the pages frayed, in chess games with T, who'd laugh. "You're too good for this place," in sketches of Harlem streets, each line a tether to home. He'd written letters to his mama, long gone, pouring out his fears in a notebook hidden under his mattress. "I'm still here," he'd written, a mantra to keep his sanity. The despair had been relentless. Some nights, he'd lie awake, listening to the prison sounds, coughs, snores, sobs, wondering if this was all there was. He'd dreamed of Hargrove's smirk, those words, "you people," echoing like a curse. The hate had grown, a dark vine twisting around his heart, threatening to choke out the man his mother had raised, a man who helped old ladies with groceries, who tossed a basketball with kids, who believed in doing right. Without Lena and her team, he'd have been lost, a number erased from the world. The Freedom Now project had been his miracle. Lena's relentless digging, Hargrove's history of misconduct, the coerced witness, the missing evidence logs, had unraveled the lie. The retired detective, Rees, had testified to Hargrove's boasts about cleaning up Harlem. The neighbor recanted, admitting he'd been threatened. The Amsterdam News had run the story, and the community had rallied. Mrs. Carter with her flowers, the kids from the rec center, now grown, chanting his name. The judge's ruling, "You are free to go," had been a lifeline, but it couldn't erase the scars. Now, in the precinct, those scars ached. A new officer, a woman with sharp eyes and a clipboard, approached the cell. "Alexander Oten?" she said, her tone neutral. "You're being processed for assaulting an officer. You got anything to say?" Alex looked up, his voice steady despite the knot in his chest. "Yeah. I want to talk. Not just about tonight, about 11 years ago. About Daniel Hargrove, and what he did to me." She raised an eyebrow but nodded, unlocking the cell. "You'll get your chance. Come with me." They led him to an interrogation room, the walls scuffed, the table scratched. Two officers sat across from him, a black man in his 40s, Officer Daniels, whose face was unreadable but not unkind, and a younger white officer, Officer Rees, who shared a last name with the retired detective but no relation. Alex's cuffs were removed, but his wrists bore red marks, a reminder of his fragility in this place. He sat straight, his hands clasped, his eyes meeting theirs. He wasn't the scared 27-year-old anymore. He was a man who'd survived, who'd held on to his dignity through a decade of hell. "I hit him," Alex said, his voice low but clear. "I'm not denying that. But you need to know why. You need to know what Hargrove did to me." Daniels leaned forward, his pen poised over a notepad. "Start talking, Mr. Oten." Alex took a deep breath, the weight of 11 years spilling out. July 12, 2014. I was 27. Working 2 jobs, bodega in the morning, diner at night. I lived in a one-room apartment on 126th Street. I was saving for college, wanted to be a social worker, help kids like I was. That morning I was walking to work, same as always. Hargrove stopped me at this bus stop, said there was a break-in at my building, said I matched the description. I didn't know anything about it. I'd been home all night. Asleep. He paused, the memory sharp as a blade. He cuffed me, patted me down, threw my wallet in the gutter. Took me in, said they found a TV, jewelry under my bed. I didn't own a TV. My place was bare, a mattress, a lamp, that's it. But he said I stole it, said a neighbor ID'd me. The neighbor was scared, pressured to lie. Hargrove made it all up. He looked at me, a black man, and decided I was guilty. No evidence, no reason, just his word. Danielle's pen moved slowly, his eyes flicking up to meet Alex's. Reese shifted, his face tight, like he was hearing something he didn't want to believe. Alex kept going, his voice steady but thick with emotion. The trial was a joke. My lawyer tried, but she was overworked, had too many cases. Hargrove testified. Smooth as anything, like he'd rehearsed it. The jury didn't look at me, not really. They saw what he wanted them to see, a criminal, not a man. Guilty, they said. Life in prison, no parole. I was 27, and my life was over. His hands trembled, but he pressed them against the table, grounding himself. Rikers it was hell. You know that, Officer Daniels. You've seen it. Men lose themselves in there. I almost did. Nights I'd lie awake, hearing guys cry, scream, give up. I saw men die. Fights, sickness, their own hands. I kept going. Because I had to. I read books, played chess, drew pictures of Harlem to remember who I was. I wrote to my mama. She passed when I was 16, but I wrote to her anyway. Told her I was still her son, still trying to make her proud. His voice cracked, and he swallowed hard, his eyes burning. I was innocent. 11 years I was innocent. Hargrove knew it. He looked at me in court, smirking, like he'd won. He said, You people always think you can talk your way out. You people. That's what he saw, a black man, nothing else. He stole my life because he could, because the system let him. Danielle's pen stopped, his eyes holding Alex's, a flicker of something, empathy maybe, crossing his face. Reese looked away, his jaw tight. Alex leaned forward, his voice rising. Tonight I saw him at that bus stop, same place he arrested me. I just wanted to know why. Why me? Why'd he lie? I asked him. And he looked at me like I was nothing, said, You people always, and I lost it. I hit him. One punch. I shouldn't have, but God, after 11 years, after everything he took, I needed him to see me. The room was quiet, the hum of the precinct distant. Daniel set down his pen, his voice low. That's a hell of a story, Mr. Oten. We've got your file, wrongful conviction, vacated last week. Freedom now. Project right? Alex nodded, his throat tight. Yeah. They proved Hargrove lied. Got the witness to recant, found no DNA, no fingerprints. A detective, Reese, no relation to you, came forward, said Hargrove bragged. About framing me. He's done it before to others. Black, Latino, anyone he decided didn't belong. Reese shifted, his voice gruff. Hargrove's being brought in now. He's at the hospital, getting his jaw checked, but he'll be here for questioning. Your story checks out with the reports, but assaulting an officer, that's serious. I know, Alex said, his eyes steady. I'll face it. But you need to look at him, not just me. As Alex sat in the interrogation room, the precinct's hum, ringing phones, officers' banter, the clatter of keyboards faded into the background. His heart still raced from the confrontation at the bus stop. From the weight of telling his story to officers who, for once, seemed to listen. Officer Daniels, the black veteran with a steady gaze, had nodded thoughtfully. Officer Reese, younger and tense, had shifted uncomfortably as Alex described Hargrove's racism, his casual, you people, that had cut deeper than any cuff. Hargrove was being questioned now, somewhere in the precinct, his version of the night's events no doubt laced with the same arrogance that had framed Alex all those years ago. But this time, the truth was out, backed by Lena's evidence, the Amsterdam news headlines, and a community that had rallied for Alex. The question now was whether the system would finally hold Hargrove accountable, or if Alex's punch would cost him his fragile freedom. The door opened, and Lena Carter stepped in, her face a mix of exhaustion and resolve. Her suit was slightly rumpled from a long day, but her eyes were sharp, carrying the fire of someone who'd spent years fighting for the forgotten. Alex, she said, her voice warm but urgent. They're moving fast. Hargrove's in custody, and the DA's office is reviewing your case, the assault and the original conviction. They're reopening the investigation into Hargrove's actions in 2014. Alex's breath caught, a flicker of hope warring with dread. Reopening? What does that mean? It means we've got a shot, Lena said, sitting across from him. The retired detective, Rees, gave us more than we expected. He's got records, notes he kept from 2014, conversations with Hargrove, where he admitted to targeting you. The neighbor's recantation is on record, and we've got forensic reports showing no link to you on the evidence. Plus, Hargrove's got a history, 6 complaints of misconduct, all involving Black or Latino suspects. The DA can't ignore this, not with the media and the community watching. Alex leaned back, his hands trembling slightly. And the assault? What I did tonight? Lena's lips pressed into a thin line. That's trickier. Assaulting an officer is serious, but given your wrongful conviction, the context, and the public outcry, we're pushing for leniency. Self-defense. Emotional distress, we're building a case. But Alex, you need to stay calm. No more punches, no matter how much he deserves it. He nodded, his throat tight. I didn't mean to. I just wanted him to answer. To see me? I know, Lena said, her hand resting near his, a gesture of solidarity. And he will. We're not just fighting for you now, we're fighting for everyone he's hurt. The reopening of Alex's case moved with a speed that felt surreal after 11 years of stagnation. The DA's office, under pressure from the Amsterdam news coverage and protests outside the precinct, led by Mrs. Carter and a new generation of Harlem activists, agreed to a full investigation into Hargrove's actions. Alex was released on bail, a condition Lena negotiated with the help of a community fund that covered the cost. He returned to the halfway house, but the days that followed were a blur of meetings with Lena, interviews with reporters, and quiet moments staring at the Harlem skyline, trying to make sense of a world that had changed while he was locked away. The courtroom, when the case finally came to trial in March 2026, was a different beast than the one Alex had faced in 2014. This time, the gallery was packed, not just with reporters but with faces from his past, Mrs. Carter, her flower stand now a small shop but her spirit unchanged, kids from the rec center, now young adults, holding signs that read, "Justice for Alex." Even T, his old chess partner from Rikers, who'd been released and showed up in a borrowed suit, grinning like they'd never been apart. Lena stood at the defense table, her presence a steady anchor, while the prosecution, led by a young ADA named Maria Torres, took an unusual stance. They weren't just retrying Alex's original case but charging Hargrove with misconduct, evidence tampering, and perjury. Alex sat in the witness box, his borrowed suit fitting better this time, his hands steady despite the weight of the moment. He recounted the story again. July 12, 2014, the bus stop, Hargrove's stop, the planted evidence, the trial. His voice was clear, each word a brick in the wall of truth he was building. I was just a man trying to live, he said, his eyes scanning the jury, a mix of faces that looked at him, really looked this time. I worked hard, helped my neighbors, dreamed of something better. Hargrove didn't see that. He saw my skin and decided I was guilty. He stole 11 years of my life, my mama's memory, my future, my hope. I'm here to take it back. The jury listened, their faces a mix of empathy and discomfort. Lena called witnesses, Rees, the retired detective, who testified to Hargrove's boasts about cleaning up Harlem by any means necessary, the neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, who broke down on the stand, admitting he'd lied out of fear, a forensic expert who confirmed no trace of Alex's DNA or fingerprints on the stolen items. The most damning moment came when Lena played a recording, obtained from Rees's old files, of Hargrove laughing with another officer about teaching that kid a lesson. The courtroom went silent, the jury's faces hardening, the judge's jaw tightening. Hargrove took the stand last, his uniform crisp but his face haggard, the swelling from Alex's punch long faded but the mark of guilt unmistakable. Under Lena's cross-examination, he faltered, his answers clipped, his story unraveling. Hargrove's eyes flicked to Alex, and for a moment, that same hate flashed, unapologetic, raw. "I followed protocol," he muttered, but the words rang hollow, and the jury's murmurs told Alex they saw it too. The verdict came after 2 days of deliberation. The courtroom was thick with tension, the air heavy with the weight of history. The foreman, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes, stood on the charge of misconduct, evidence tampering, and perjury against Officer Daniel Hargrove. "We find the defendant guilty." The room erupted, cheers, sobs, Mrs. Carter's voice shouting, "Thank you, Jesus!" Alex sat frozen, his breath caught, as Lena turned to him, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Alex," she whispered. "You got justice." Hargrove's face was a mask of shock, his hands cuffed as bailiffs led him away. Alex's eyes followed him, not with triumph but with a quiet resolve. The officer's hate hadn't broken him, not in 2014, not in Rikers, not now. He'd won. Not just his freedom, but the truth laid bare for the world to see. The assault charge against Alex was dropped, the DA's citing extraordinary circumstances and public support. He walked out of the courthouse into a Harlem spring, the air warm, the streets alive with the scent of blooming flowers and grilling street vendors. Mrs. Carter hugged him, her eyes wet, her flower shop's roses pinned to her coat. "You're home, baby," she said, and for the first time in years, Alex felt it home, not just a place but a feeling, a future. The months that followed were a slow rebuilding. Alex moved out of the halfway house into a small apartment, funded by a settlement from the city for his wrongful conviction. It wasn't riches, but it was enough to start over. He enrolled in community college, taking night classes in social work, his old dream rekindled. He volunteered at the rec center, coaching basketball, telling kids his story, not to scare them, but to show them they could survive, could hold their heads high no matter what the world threw at them. He visited his mother's grave, a small stone in a Brooklyn cemetery, and left a rose from Mrs. Carter's shop. "I made it, Mama," he whispered, his voice thick. "I kept steady." He felt her presence, not in the wind or the sky, but in the strength he'd found, the dignity he'd never let go. Hargrove's conviction sent ripples through the city. The Amsterdam News ran a series on police misconduct, naming other victims of Hargrove's tactics. Protests grew, demands for reform louder, and Alex's story became a beacon for change. He spoke at rallies, his voice steady, his words simple but powerful. "I'm not the only one. There are others still locked up, still fighting. See them. Hear them." One evening, as the sun set over Harlem, Alex stood on 125th Street, the bus stop now just a place, not a wound. He watched kids play, vendors pack up, the city breathing around him. He was 40 now, his hair more gray than black, his eyes carrying both pain and hope. He'd found not just freedom but justice, a rare gift in a world that often looked away. The fire in his chest had cooled, replaced by a quiet strength, a belief that his story could light the way for others. He turned to walk home, his steps light, his mother's prayer echoing in his mind, *. "Keep me steady, Lord. Keep me whole." *. He was both steady, whole, and unbroken. And as he moved through the streets of Harlem, He carried a truth that would not be silenced. Justice was possible, and he was living. Proof. Alex Odin's journey is a testament to the resilience of the black spirit, a reminder that dignity can endure even the darkest injustices. His story challenges us to see the unseen, to hear the unheard, to fight for those the system has failed. Let his courage inspire us to hold fast to hope, to stand tall in the face of hate, and to believe that truth, when fought for, can prevail. Keep steady, keep whole, and keep pushing forward. Because justice, like freedom, is a fire that grows brighter when we carry it together. If this story encouraged you, share it with someone else who needs it, and let's keep encouraging ourselves around the globe, because Black Lives Matters.